but we'll just go ahead and get started just with a few minutes of, just giving ourselves a break, just, creating space in the mind with a little bit of breathing meditation.
Tooth mode.
Again, we'll just sit comfortably with an upright spine, feet flat, and again, we'll just start by bringing our awareness to the physical sensation of the breath as it passes into and back out of the tip of the nostrils, not trying to control the breath or breathe in any particular way, only trying to notice the physical sensations that arise with the in-breath and the out-breath. And then when any other distracting thoughts or feelings arise, we just notice that the mind has moved from the intended object and gently, without judgment or frustration, just bring the mind back to that present moment physical sensation. And then just try to create or establish in the mind a virtuous motivation. Just try to think that the purpose of your time isn't just for yourself alone, but also that when we develop our own qualities, other people benefit from that. We become more able to benefit others. So the purpose of our time is also to be able to be of greater benefit to, if possible, connecting with the idea of benefiting all sentient beings. All right. So, welcome or welcome back. Good afternoon. This is class 2. If anyone missed class 1, the classes are recorded and available on Tibetan Buddhism's YouTube channel. So you can find it there. So before we kind of get started in a more formal way, I did just want to check in with people with respect to last week's class, and also the meditation I do have, and maybe toward the end of the class, I have Google Drive links for both that meditation and then another one for the coming week, but which I can post in the chat if that's the best way to do that. If not, somebody can let me know if there's a better way to share those. But if just in case no people didn't weren't able to get that from last week, I do have that and another one also. But so I wanted to check and see, um, did people have thoughts or questions that came from reflecting on what we talked about last week, or from working, if possible, working with that meditation at all?
Hi, Venerable Dondrub. I don't really have a comment, but I just wanted to thank you in advance for having this series, and I just really look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Happy to be here. Anyone else at all?
Venerable Dondrub, hi, it's Charmaine. How are you?
Well, how are you?
Good. I'm sorry I have to leave class a little early today. I'm disappointed, but I'm so glad to be here for some of the time. I really like having something to work on. So I appreciated having the meditation. So I had something to do to work with the material a little bit more internally. So I think that's helpful. And if you're going to do more of that, then I appreciate it. I thought it worked well for me. So thank you.
Mary Jo, did you have a question or?
Yes, thank you. I enjoyed last class a lot. I saw it again on YouTube where I could, soak it in a little better. I'm not so technically adept, and I'm hoping I can get to the meditation somehow. My chat thing, I don't know how to download from my chat. I'm not sure I can on this device. And I don't know who could help me, but I might need some help in that way. And thank you for doing that. I agree. It's nice to have something to kind of be working on like that.
Yeah, so I don't know if somebody maybe has your email address or something like that might work better.
Okay. Yes, I could put my email address in the chat box. Would that help?
I think Venerable Dondrub, we have Mary Jo's contact info, so we can reach out and help her. We know you, Mary Jo.
Yes, I'm not too, able to do these things, these online things. Should I just put a message in the SBC, the question thing?
Mary Jo, we'll just contact you. I'll make sure that someone
Great.
from Tibetan Orbling reaches out to you.
Thank you so much.
Sure,
Thank you.
Mary
That would
Jo.
be
No problem, my friend.
wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. So if for a moment I could try to sum up, kind of where we were from last week, and I'll, try today to not use phrases like psychological subroutine or these sort of more technical. We'll try to, try to use maybe more broad ways of thinking about this. But what we did spend some time on last week was, and I think it's important because this material, this whole course, I feel like really all it's doing, its whole purpose is to give us a framework for navigating our lives in a way that is ultimately more effective in bringing about the things that we are all already trying to accomplish. It's just these are ways of focusing our time and our attention and our mind on perhaps to some degree things that we've become familiar with that aren't serving us in the best way, and then new ways of thinking and processing and making decisions that are perhaps more effective, that are more, in a way, Lama Yeshe often uses the word skillful. So navigating our lives and our choices and our decisions in a more skillful way. So we did spend time, in a way, my goal was to distinguish this idea, which is what the course is about, this idea of attachment. Because when we hear the word attachment, we think, oh, well, but of course, I'm attached to my children. And of course, I'm attached to my family and my friends. And so we think, well, maybe that we're being encouraged to not have that kind of close emotional bond. We might think that that's attachment. So it's really important in the beginning to get clarity on the fact that when in the context of this course, we're going to be thinking about working with the energy of attachment, that we understand that there is an element of that where there's an exaggeration that's happening, where the mind isn't really seeing things as clearly, as lucidly, as realistically as possible. And so when we can start to find ways of training the mind, or cultivating or developing habits and tendencies in the mind where we do start to see things more clearly, more realistically, then it is the distorted part of our interactions, our relationships that we work on, that we change. And so it isn't in any way a sense of closeness or a sense of warm-heartedness or that sort of thing. It is only when the mind has a way of relating where there's an exaggeration, where there's a sense of not really being in touch, with what's present before us. And I used the word last week, maybe hallucination or distortion or exaggeration. There's something kind of off about what we are bringing to our interaction. And so that's kind of, and so, he says at the end of what we were talking about, and I think that this is the summation really of what I want to keep coming back to, and the summation really of the whole course is, he says, just as we are the creator of all of our own problems, we are also the creator of our own liberation, our own joy, and everything that is necessary for attaining the blissful liberation that is contained in the body and mind that we have right now. So we have the seeds of attaining, and here, so going into sort of the technical, definition, this class isn't really designed to explore sort of these more technical ideas, but we can say, liberation from the dissatisfied mind, liberation from the processes that we are kind of stuck in that cause us to not be getting what we want out of life, not be navigating our lives in the most skillful way. So what's important is to understand the really hopeful part of this, which is to say that we already possess the seeds of the wisdom and the ability to unpack and understand why this is happening and what we can do about it. And so, of course, I mean, we talked about last week how, and this can become a part of the course if people want, or it might seem, a little bit dark or depressive. But when we talked last week about how the title of the book is, not if the chocolate runs out, but when the chocolate runs out. Well, of course, for all of us, the past year, has been probably the most profound example of that. And, when I was thinking of bringing that up, of course, I don't mean that can sound in a way glib, and I don't mean for it to, because of course people have lost things that are not an exaggeration, that are not, that are realistically extremely difficult to deal with. But also we've been cut off from just the outlets that we had before. And we've had to find new outlets, new ways of dealing with stress, dealing with these things that come up. And so, of course, here with the idea of exaggeration, the idea of attachment, that's not to say that the really profound losses that people are dealing with are attachments, or that but at the same time, we can think about how we've had to shift from not being able to access all of the same sorts of things and so if people want to have a place to talk about that, we can certainly, if that would be helpful to do that. I know that, I'm not necessarily the best person per se with respect to that, because it's true in my own experience that my level of engagement was already lower than is typical. Although, even for me, I will say that in the beginning of that whole process, it did really feel quite claustrophobic, in the sense that it was interesting, and it was interesting to watch my mind in that process, because although it's true that there were many things that I wouldn't normally do, many sorts of these sorts of outlets, again, that were cut off from people, the fact that I couldn't was something that my mind started to rebel against. Just the fact that, and of course, there were concerns about, you know, is society, the ways in which society is changing, and are things going to, are the things that we rely on going to break in really profound ways. So again, it's important to not relate to this in a superficial way, in a glib kind of way, but there are a whole variety of losses here, and ways that we related to things that we've had to find different ways of relating. Um, so I don't know if anybody wanted to also share or think about how that has unfolding and is unfolding, because of course things are also now even getting worse than they were before in many ways. So does anybody want to say or think or about that?
And I have maybe one thing to say, Venerable Dondrub. One of the things that I've been hearing a lot of is that the vaccine is here, so people are feeling like everything's going to be fine now and everything will be fine soon. Like I've had people saying like, are we going to open now or maybe in another month, now that everyone's getting the vaccine? And the fact is that I think we're so desirous to be together and to be less lonely, but that I think it's still going to take quite a long time before it's safe to meet in groups and before people even have a comfort level, some of them, of meeting in big groups. And it's really hard to disappoint people and to continue to tell them that we remain closed in order to keep everybody safe. That's been something that I've had to struggle with a little bit. And I just think we have to be patient still. And it's hard because my attachment needs aren't getting met. I don't get to go do fun stuff. I'm not out all the time. I mean, it's challenging, but at least I have somebody home with me. Some of the people who really want us to open and to hurry, they're completely alone. And so it's like heartbreaking. And at the same time, I don't have much wiggle room. So I just thought I'd share that.
So to get into some of what Lama Yeshe brings about next, he does kind of go into, there kind of maybe two things that I want to look at, for today. One is the psychological process of when the mind has this urge, this impulse to contact an object where, this object of exaggeration, this object of attachment. He says, one of these, we talked about these sort of pithy quotes that are throughout the book, and talked about sort of focusing the conversations on those. And he says, all of the problems of the world can be traced to a feeling of not being whole. He says that so many of our problems arise because we feel cut off from something we need. We do not feel whole and therefore turn expectantly toward other people for the qualities that we imagine missing in ourselves. All of the problems of the world, from one person's anxiety to warfare between nations, can be traced to this feeling of not being whole. That's what Lama Yeshe, those are Lama Yeshe's words, not my words. So what this gets at for me is how the psychological process of needing or feeling this impulse to contact external object. It starts with dissatisfaction. We talked about toward the end of the last class, how Lama Yeshe was saying that the mind of dissatisfaction is kind of not a inevitable part of the mind, but for us, it's still quite a present part of the mind. It's a part of the mind that we are all still dealing with. We've not yet really overcome the dissatisfied mind. So because we haven't overcome the dissatisfied mind, when we have this impulse to reach out, to go out to an object, a pleasant object that we would like to bring in. So we talked about kind of this pushing, this pulling and pushing that is on that these exaggerations give rise to. Because we have this mind of dissatisfaction, because we have these exaggerations, we relate to everything else mainly through pushing and pulling, mainly through wanting to pull in the things that we think are pleasant and mainly wanting to push out the things that we think are unpleasant. And that process, its origin is not being satisfied with the present moment, thinking that the present moment has to be improved upon, that what we are or what we're doing or what we're experiencing in the present isn't enough, has to be improved upon. And then we think, well, the only way to do that is through some sort of object, through some sort of external thing, to bring in a pleasant thing or to reject an unpleasant thing. And that has to do with not feeling, if Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe's disciple, says that we can't really imagine the thought of no need, the thought of a person who's beyond neediness, who's beyond this pushing and pulling, and how so pushing and pulling give rise to and reinforce this dissatisfaction, reinforce, because when we push and we pull and we relate to things on that level, then we decide or we think that our success at being content can be established and only established based on how successful we are with being able to push and to pull. We use that as the benchmark for determining, well, this is how content I am. And if I'm not able to push and to pull, and I just have to accept, then that means that that is an inherent limitation on my own capacity for contentment. We have that kind of view, that kind of mental viewpoint that, and again, we talked about how it's really reinforced in our culture. Kind of the whole idea of the American dream is that, well, I'm successful when I can pull in all of these objects, and I'm successful when I can push out all of these objects. And that's what success is. That's what the point is really doing that well. And that there is no other way of thinking about success or what the point of things are. But what Lama Yeshe is pointing out is that, he says that we learn from this. So I also wanted to talk about what this whole process is teaching us, what this whole process, when this process doesn't work the way that we had hoped, when we aren't successful in bringing in pleasant objects, and when we're not successful in pushing out unpleasant objects, that is what we define or would say are, well, now we have problems, right? The extent to which we can't do this. And of course, another way of defining that is just life, right? Of course, because we're not successful. This is an impossible idea. And that's why it's ultimately an unsatisfying approach, is because the idea that we have, this unspoken idea, is that, well, if I can just get really good at pushing and pulling, then I'll get to a place where I'm satisfied. But that doesn't actually work. That doesn't actually happen. And so when that doesn't actually happen, then quote unquote problems arise. Meaning that we now either are separated from pleasant things, or that our experience contains things that we think are unpleasant. And both of those, our mind labels as problems. It's a problem when I can't remove something unpleasant, and it's a problem when I see something pleasant that I can't bring in. And again, he's saying that all of that is led by the fact, or led by, or traced back to the feeling of not being, he says, not being whole, not feeling like this present moment is enough. And so for me, when I'm working with this, when I'm looking at this, I think back over my life, and I try to start to, in a way, get clarity on, in a way, that there are sort of these dual tracks or dual processes in the mind. The surface level track or process that he is talking about is this impulse, this kind of reflexive or knee-jerk impulse of pushing and pulling. And it's so easy to get stuck in this track, to observe the pleasant or unpleasant object, and then for the mind to not do anything else but kind of stay stuck on this present moment isn't enough. This external thing is either pleasant and therefore the source of what will improve the present moment, or the source of what's causing the present moment to be unsatisfying. And as long as we stay ruminating on that one track, then it's like it's a domino effect where all of the moments of mind are just reinforcing that way of pushing and pulling. And so if we never, in a way, connect with a deeper level of our own mind, then we're going to stay stuck in pushing and pulling. And so, I was thinking, when I was working with this, I was thinking about how for many years I related emotionally in a way to food. And I think, in the teachings, there's a number of restrictions, that are placed on food for, and if you look at the teachings, in a lot of the commentaries and things, they point out that um, that they that that a big reason why that's true is because it's such a powerful object for all of us. And even still, I mean, no one, how many people are like making food every day and eating it and thinking to themselves, oh, this is awful. Oh, I really don't enjoy my breakfast. I really don't enjoy my lunch. I really don't like this is terrible. We we try that sometimes, but then we fail, right? We try that for a week or 2 weeks or a month, but then ultimately that's an uptight, rigid way of thinking, and ultimately it fails. Another one of these quotes is, that we can't stop attachment by generating some kind of radical rejecting mind. That's another one of these ideas where, you know, what we can do with, for example, with food is to try to just have a more balanced view, right? So if we get stuck in, well, today was tough. Today there was a lot of stress, there was a lot of anxiety. And so I need something to go well today. And so I'm going to eat some things that are, fried or sugary, or because those are the sorts of things that will trigger in me a pleasant feeling. And therefore, at least something today will go right. That was, when I'm working with this, that was kind of what was in one of the things that was coming up for me, is that for years, that I did that, I felt that way. Um, and, I have been able in more recent years to get more space around that particular course. As I said, I still only make food that I enjoy, right? But in a way, I've changed how I define what I enjoy. Um, I've been able to reframe that. And then also, and part of that is recognizing that although I ascribe certain pleasant qualities to certain types of food, I'm also able, with that second track, that deeper track, that isn't just the present moment is unpleasant, and therefore what can I push, what can I pull, but this deeper track of, well, is it true that I can only push and pull, and arguing against that energy? And is it true that what I want to pull, is it true that it really is only pleasant, that it really is made out of pleasantness? Or is it also true that all phenomena have some pleasant characteristics and also some unpleasant characteristics? And if I can recognize that there's this combination, then that's one of the ways I can start to get more wisdom about what to include in my choices, how to make choices, again, how to navigate my life in a more skillful way, by recognizing, well, yes, Snickers and Coca-Cola, yes, they have some pleasant aspects. They also have some drawbacks. And so how do I move from, okay, track one in the mind is activated, but then how do I shift that into track two? How do I connect with a deeper reality, or a more realistic view that isn't just this domino of pleasant, pleasant, pleasant. I need unpleasant, unpleasant, unpleasant. I don't want, I don't want, I don't want, which is going to, that's kind of like living on autopilot, kind of like just this energy arises, this impulse arises, and then we just energize the track of that one impulse. We don't have to, but Buddhism, Lama Yeshe, is suggesting that there are ways of interrupting that track, that there are ways of intervening in that process and then contacting that deeper track, that deeper level. And one of them is appreciating the fullness of phenomena, appreciating that things are not made out of pleasantness, things are not made out of unpleasantness, that things are complicated. And then, of course, we'll look at a whole variety of these things, but that's one way. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions or anything that people might like to focus in on as a point of conversation or discussion?
So would it be right to say that we're trying to get a more balanced view of whatever we're doing? Um, rather than just going on without thinking. So I guess you're saying what we're trying to do is get more involved with what we're doing as we're doing it, rather than starting it and continuing on that track. Would that be?
Yeah, so to find methods, to find ways of kind of arguing against or stopping and reflecting on what's occurring in the mind and checking and seeing, is this, Lama Yeshe points out, we think that attachment is the mechanism by which I will become more contented, by which I will be, that over the course of my life, by following attachment, by pushing and by pulling, that if I energize that approach, that it will work, that it will get me where I want to go. But ultimately, we see that it doesn't. But the problem, in a way, the problem is we're still not convinced yet that by working with that, we can get to something even better. And, hopefully, I think hopefully what we'll uncover is that it is possible to that first track of I have to push, I have to pull. And so I'm only going to reinforce this sort of, in a way, uncritical idea that this is made out of happiness, and that this is made out of this, unpleasantness. Once we can start to, and even, of course, in the moment is the most difficult. In the moment, due to the power of the object and due to the power of our familiarity, in the moment, interrupting it is very difficult. So we kind of, in a way, have to start becoming familiar with interrupting it when these objects are not a part of our experience, really in meditation in a way, or at least in just kind of thinking about these things. Meditation is really just is a specialized, analytical meditation is really just a specialized form of thinking. So we have to generate these new habits, these new tendencies, these new familiarities initially separated from the objects that trigger these processes, but then as they start to become something that we are more familiar with, then we can access them more easily, even in the face of the object, even when we're actually dealing with the object itself. Um, any other thoughts or questions or points of conversation? Yeah, go ahead, Mary Jo. You can unmute yourself.
Um, so it seems like this way of becoming familiar with other things. I mean, like food, maybe other foods or things. Um, that's a that seems like it takes a different way of. I mean, how do you do that? Could have little index cards taped up saying, "Remember, remember this too," or something. But it seems like it's hard to reach that state of going down a different groove in our minds. And it's one thing, I think, to talk about it, and it's another thing to do it. And it's one of the reasons why making lifestyle changes, for example, is very difficult. It's something that is known to be difficult. Although maybe I shouldn't say it's difficult, that makes it even more difficult. But um, what do you think about that?
Sure. So, I mean, of course, as I, mentioned last week, Buddhism, it doesn't have really immediate, quick solutions to anything. It is a process of just developing new familiarities, new ways of thinking, and it does take time, and it is challenging. Um, one technique that I have found helpful, and that can, in a way, sometimes at least, that can be implemented during the arising of this, which of course at least requires the introspective awareness to recognize that we're starting to get caught in an attachment, so there's that part of it. But if we can recognize that we've started to get magnetized to something, and that we've started to sort of ruminate on it, and then that we've started to just that this sort of gravitational pull, this sort of impulse, that it is there, then for me, I get into trouble with that when I just allow that to unfold under its own power,
Mhm.
and I don't do anything. One thing that I do sometimes is to just stop and just sit quietly with the that gravitational pull that's happening in the mind, and just allow it to be there in the mind, but I'm not actually engaging in behaviors. I'm not trying to figure out how do I actually scratch this itch. I'm just allowing the desire to scratch the itch exist in the mind. Um, and then in a way, if you can sit with it for a time, then what happens often is that that energy will dissipate, that that energy will naturally kind of just fall away in the mind. And then, and of course we all struggle in the meditation that I'll put in the chat for next week. It is going to be on working with the energy of attachment. Last week the emphasis was more so on understanding how the mind creates our experiences, and the next meditation is more focused on working with the energy of attachment. And so of course people are attached to different things. We all struggle in different ways, or there isn't one size fits all approach. We have to tailor the approach to our own experiences. But so if we notice that, I tend to struggle in this kind of way, then we can start to tailor a realistic view that's based around the objects that are coming up for us. So, for example, that could be, for some people it is inanimate objects. They collect things, and they just kind of want more and better and new. And for some people it could be experiences. They always want to be kind of traveling and having different kinds of for other people it's more so related to a status or a place in society. So people and of course for many of us we have more than, it isn't just we only struggle in one way. We all have to some degree a whole variety of things. But when we're trying to work with that, again, we have to start when the object isn't, when that itch isn't so strongly in the mind that we need to scratch it, but we have that distance in our mind, and we can sit in meditation and watch that happening, and then be like, it's almost as if I feel like this object is by its nature unpleasant or by its nature pleasant. Is that true? And then we just analyze. And then the result of that is that we get some momentary insight into, well, it's not true. I am exaggerating. I am not seeing this clearly. And the more moments of those insights that we can build up, then the stronger that tendency becomes. And the easier it is to remember that when we're confronted by the object, and we would normally just grab it. We would normally just reflexively push or pull. So we have to build up kind of a resiliency to that impulse, and that really starts separated from the impulse in a variety of ways. So just briefly, I wanted to also think about, this is just, again, maybe just a point, mainly going to be a point of personal reflection over the next week, that maybe if people want to come back and share their thoughts in working with this, and then we can explore it in more detail next week. But what is it when this process doesn't work, and we therefore, as I mentioned before, when it doesn't work, we would say, well, now I have a problem because I have this unpleasant thing where I can't get this pleasant thing. When that happens, and of course it happens every day for all of us, happens multiple times every day for all of us. When that happens, what does that experience teach us about our mind? What insight can we glean from the fact that that has happened, from the fact that we observe, I now am labeling this experience as a problem because I can't push it away or I can't pull it in to my experience. He says, Lama Yeshe says, that we learn from suffering, from problems, by realizing where it comes from and exactly what it is that makes us suffer. Thus, for those seekers investigating the nature of inner reality, problems actually help. Learning from problems gives us more energy, more wisdom, and deeper realizations. So every time that we catch ourselves in a day labeling something as a problem, we can start to try to develop the attitude that recognizes that this is showing me something about the nature of my mind. This is showing me what I struggle with, what my attachments are, because I this is causing me stress, this is causing me anxiety, this is causing me to be depressed or to feel a sense of unease. And that sense of unease is the direct result of the fact that this object is an object that I'm unable to push or pull. And when that dynamic arises, it's an opportunity to learn something about how our mind is functioning. And if our mind is functioning kind of in a way as, in the most skillful or the way in which will reliably lead to being, navigating our lives, again, navigating our lives in a way that is where we actually find it possible to connect with a greater sense of satisfaction, a greater sense of ease, a greater sense of connectedness and purpose. So that's just something to leave people with. And so let me also now put in the chat those links. These are, again, Google Drive links. And so, one moment. Okay. So people may need like reasonably quick internet. They're about 8-9 gigabytes. They're not the smallest of files. So I don't know. I hope that's not a problem. I'll also just put my email address in the chat. And so you can, if you would like me to find a different or better way to get that to you, please send me an email and I will do that. But yeah, so that's just something to leave people with, to make to try over the next week to make an effort to, instead of thinking this is a problem and therefore this is intolerable and this is awful and this is miserable, try to think, I'm labeling this as a problem, therefore, can I see this really in a way not as a problem, but can I see this now as I have an opportunity to understand something deeper about the nature of my mind? And then what is that? What can I learn? What did I learn by reflecting in that way? Okay. So we'll have to leave it there for time. But so let's just briefly Again, I don't know if people are familiar with dedication. People might have all been here last week or have some familiarity, but when we end, we tried again just to recollect that virtuous intention that we had at the beginning, and then think whatever positive energy I've created, may it ripen for the benefit of others. May it serve as a cause for my own continued spiritual growth and development, so that I can develop my qualities and be of benefit to others. And may it also ripen in whatever way sentient beings need for their benefit. So we just have a sense of releasing, a sense of offering our time and our energy for the benefit of others.
Thank you, Venerable.